Heather, and Heather Messens, thank you for being with us on this Yoga for Unity and Well-being. You were already with us last year in 2022, and this year the topic is really yours because the topic we chose for this Yoga for Unity program is mental health. So we could not go without you. And thank you for being with us again this year.
Thank you.
So a brief introduction, but I would like, to tell our viewers, if you want to catch up with the journey of Heather, please watch the previous episode from last year. It's still on the channel, where Heather is explaining to us how she came into yoga and her journey, personal journey, which is very relevant for today's topic. But Heather, briefly, so you are the founder of the Minded Institute, and definitely your topic of predilection is the mind. We would love to jump into the topic directly and ask you, yoga, what does it do for the mind? How does it work? What is the research telling us that, this movement that I find is physical actually has some direct actions on the mind? So can you give us the latest update of the research?
Okay, firstly, I think it's really, thank you for that introduction. I think it's really important to disabuse our audience of the notion that yoga is about physical postures, because yoga has 8 aspects, or we usually translate into English limbs. And the movement part, the asana, that's only one of 8 aspects. And so when we're talking about yoga's potential to influence the mind, and we are talking about the asanas, so movement definitely has an impact on the mind, but the other aspects of yoga also have impact on the mind. And those are things like observances, discipline, breath control, bringing one's attention inward, focusing of the mind, moving into deep states of meditation. Now, these days, so much research is being published. If you look on PubMed, which is the place that houses probably the largest body of biomedical and quite a lot of psychological research, you'll see that almost every day there's a new study. So I can't tell you what the most recent one is, but I can say that when analyses are done looking at yoga's greatest effect, the 2 things that emphatically come up are yoga's capacity to reduce stress, and therefore that plays a big role in reducing anxiety and even anxiety spectrum disorders, and also yoga's capacity to improve mood, and yoga's therefore capacity to improve depression. And in fact, in terms of specific conditions, be they mental or physical, yoga's highest efficacy or effectiveness continuously shows to be in depression. And that's interesting because in the original Yoga Sutras, right, the second line is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means yoga leads to the cessation of the busy mind. And that's what we find in terms of modern science, whether we're having people subjectively report or we're looking at objective measures, and those would be more physiological.
So what happens really in the nervous system that some in for simple audience, what are the maybe the chemicals or the changes that we can see that yoga impacts? And we're talking the full system of yoga, either pranayama or asanas or meditation. So what are the changes that we can notice?
Sure. So before I answer it, sorry, Veronique, I realized I didn't say about the asanas, that part, and it could go back to that. We don't know specifically the impact of particular asanas. Different schools try to make claims that, for example, this group of asanas, this group of postures has this particular effect. But from what we understand right now, it's the cumulative effect of different postures, and there are different effects of holding still and stretching versus flowing and moving, and both of these are of benefit. Now, in terms of the neurochemicals, I think probably the greatest amount of research in yoga has looked at cortisol. So that is the stress hormone of the system, right? It allows us to mobilize as well. And it's not just a stress hormone, it supports us waking up in the morning in relationship to sunlight. And Various different studies have reported that yoga reduces levels of cortisol, and we see elevated levels in most mental health conditions, even depression, where you would think that somebody would feel lower. And we also see it in various different health conditions, for example, in cancer. And yoga continuously has been demonstrated to reduce cortisol levels. And cortisol also has, at high levels, negative effects on the overall body. So that's really positive. The area that I'm most interested in terms of neurochemicals is GABA. So GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. And you said to make sure that it was accessible to everybody. So you have both excitatory chemicals and neurotransmitters that send messages in your brain and spinal cord, and you have those that support the process of inhibition. Now, GABA does many things, but for our intents and purposes, GABA supports the inhibition of fear related responses. And people with depression, anxiety, PTSD, chronic pain, and also epilepsy all have lowered levels of GABA. Dr. Chris Streeter, who is a psychiatrist, a neurologist, a lecturer, and a yoga teacher, she was really interested in how patients presenting with all of those different conditions would, after a yoga class, have improvement. And likewise, patients with all of these different conditions would be prescribed at some point things that could increase the availability of GABA. So she thought, is it possible that yoga is elevating levels of GABA? And this is one of the reasons it's beneficial for these populations. So in 2007, she did her first study on this without a control, and she demonstrated that yoga elevated levels of GABA to statistical significant levels. That means it's very likely that yoga caused those increases. But her critics suggested that without a control condition, any kind of movement might have that an effect. So in 2010, she compared yoga against a walking group. She used medical students from the Boston University School of Medicine for both groups. They were both in the gym, and she tried to metabolically match the rate of walking with the metabolic rate reached during the asanas. And that means essentially you're using and creating the same amount of energy, or ATP. And here, yoga showed up again statistically significantly better than walking. So it's not just about movement, it's something specific about yoga. She again did another study in 2020. She looked at participants with major depressive disorder, and she demonstrated that yoga increased levels of GABA. And really importantly for our audience, she showed that that elevation lasted for up to 8 days, but not longer, suggesting that everybody that practices should practice no less than twice a week. And she estimated that they should practice 30 to 45 minutes a day. And that study included something called coherent breathing, where people inhale and exhale at 5 breaths per minute. So I'll just add one more chemical because you've got me on a roll, and I could just keep going on my own soliloquy probably for an hour. Another one, actually, no, two. I'm sorry, two. So another one that we've seen increased through the practice of yoga is called brain derived neurotrophic factor. It's a protein complex. And we have learned since the 1960s, but it's only become popular probably in the last decade or two, that the brain is plastic at all stages of life and can remodel itself, right? We thought that that wasn't possible in the adult brain due to Nobel Prize winner Ramon E. Cajal in 1906, but that was overturned. Now, BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor, it's considered the fertilizer for neuroplasticity, and it supports the process of allowing the brain to remodel itself and change, which is essential if we're going to shift our thought patterns, right? There is a direct correlation between having greater levels of BDNF and the ability to come out of mental health disturbances where you need new tracks in the brain, which give rise to different thoughts. And a series of different studies have all demonstrated that yoga can increase BDNF. So that's exciting. And then finally, there's been a real interest, I'd say, in the last few years in terms of yoga's capacity to reduce inflammatory markers. So, obviously, we want inflammation when we need to fight off an infection. That is the role of inflammation. But we now know that inflammation can be triggered due to poor diet and also due to stress. In fact, there's a subset of genes that have been discovered called conserved transcription response to adversity, CTRA, which we now know are upregulated or expressed more when somebody feels isolated or stressed out. And having high levels of inflammation within the body put us at risk for so many different diseases, from heart disease to type 2 diabetes. It puts us at greater risk for dementia, Parkinson's, etc., autoimmune conditions as well. Although for many of these things, we need to have predispositions. And a whole variety of different studies in yoga have demonstrated the reduction of inflammatory factors. We think possibly this is happening because the vagus nerve, which comes out of the brainstem and moves down throughout the viscera, it releases something that inhibits inflammation. It releases acetylcholine. And we believe that yoga helps to really activate this nerve. So maybe this is one of the reasons. And coming back into the mental health piece, when we have high levels of inflammatory markers in the body, they can enter the brain. And I'm sure you know, Barney, because you're a doctor, that we have a barrier in the brain so that a lot of those inflammatory markers are protected from entering. But the posterior part of the pituitary gland, it actually has direct contact with the bloodstream. And when we have those inflammatory markers in the bloodstream, they can enter that little part. And when they enter the brain, they can trigger depressive experience for the person. So it was a long answer, but it's a big question.
It was wow answer because it was quite simple. I hope, I mean, if people could not catch everything, they can always go back and review, but it was quite simple. So it increases some substance in my brain that makes me feel happier. It helps brain plasticity. That means that I can adapt to some situation, answer in a different way, and I'm not always stuck in that path that I'm in right now. Reduces inflammation, which I know plays, such heavy role in many diseases that I know about, if I'm not considering myself as a doctor. So that's quite, I've found, for something simple like yoga, that needs just a yoga mat and someone to help you to move. And so any mental, problem can be benefiting from yoga, like you said, depression, anxiety. Can we also go to something heavier like trauma, PTSD, and schizophrenia? Is it also recommended?
So recommended is a word I might not use just to, but there is research which shows that yoga is beneficial for people with PTSD. In fact, that's my area of expertise, PTSD. And it's a region that researchers and the yoga community are really interested in. Yoga is shown to reduce symptoms of PTSD, help people reconnect with their bodies, because often individuals in the experience of trauma have their physical agency compromised. So it allows them to reconnect because a disconnect can happen. And it supports emotional regulation, which in PTSD we often lose. So it's been shown to be beneficial for people. For schizophrenia, specifically for what we call negative symptoms, it's been shown to be beneficial. So the positive symptoms of schizophrenia are what we usually think of. Those are the hallucinations. They can be auditory or they can be visual. And medication is often used for those symptoms for individuals. In addition, we have negative symptoms, which are the loss of facial expression, connection with others, and emotion. And there have been a few studies which have shown that yoga can reduce the negative symptoms. And there are really no medications that properly target that. So this is very important. In fact, Dr. Gangadhar, who used to be the head of the National Institutes of Mental Health and Neuroscience, he and his team in Bangalore, they conducted a really interesting study for individuals with schizophrenia. So we have this another hormone. We talked about cortisol a moment ago. We have something called oxytocin. It's often called the cuddle hormone, the feel good hormone. And not only does it allow us to bond with other people, but having healthy levels of it supports something we call social cognition. That is the ability to accurately read somebody else's facial expression and gestures so that we can respond in a way that is appropriate. And if our cortisol levels are really low, we have limited social cognition, which probably means we won't bond with people effectively. And sadly, it can leave us isolated. People with schizophrenia, it's already a stigma having that diagnosis, sadly. And then to have low levels of oxytocin means low social cognition and further isolation. So Gangadhar's lab used a yoga protocol for a group of people with schizophrenia. And after a number of weeks, they found a 300% increase in oxytocin, which is super exciting, and a more accurate reading of other people's facial expressions, which gives rise to social cognition. So that's super cool. The other area, in terms of more, well, actually, it's not just one, there's a few. In terms of more acute mental health issues, we also have yoga's role in addictions, whether it's from cigarettes, alcohol, or other substances of misuse, and shown to help people manage the cravings, the difficult emotions that come up. In addition, yoga's role in eating disorders. And that's really intriguing because some people think that because yoga involves movement and exercise, that it should be contraindicated for people with eating disorders. But actually, it allows us to reconnect with sensation in the body and have a appreciation for the body's functionality. We call that functional appreciation. And is there another? I mean, basically, like almost every acute mental health population, there's some value, but it's really important if you have any of these mental health issues or you want to help somebody with these mental health issues, that either you go to somebody trained in that particular area or that you train in that particular area.
Okay, so let's go there because that's exactly where you work also a lot through your other institution, where you work with the healthcare tissue of UK especially. And can you tell us a little bit more about this alliance that you have
You mean the
created?
Yoga and Healthcare
Yes,
Alliance?
because you're working
Okay.
to integrate yoga into the healthcare system. And I think with what, all the good news that you've given us, it's really important that yoga is considered as an added therapy in
Yeah.
many of the diseases that we have. Yeah.
Well, actually, the Minded Institute, though, you're right that the Yoga and Healthcare Alliance is working to bring yoga into healthcare. But the Minded Institute is training people in yoga therapy, which is a 2-year course and really properly prepares yoga teachers and health professionals to work with various different kinds of conditions, including both acute and not acute mental health issues. And so I think it's probably more appropriate if you want to work with PTSD or schizophrenia, which the Yoga and Healthcare Alliance doesn't teach people to do. But the Yoga and Healthcare Alliance, which you've mentioned, was founded with the intention, like you said, of integrating yoga into healthcare, specifically for people with non acute health issues. So mild depression, mild anxiety, for people with pre-diabetes, potentially at risk of having heart disease, and people who are socially isolated. And our focus is something which in the UK is called social prescribing. I don't know if everybody knows what it is. Would it be helpful if I describe that?
Yes. Yeah, because it's
So,
different in every country. Yeah.
okay, great. So, in the UK, as many other parts of the world, but it was pioneered here. UK, it was recognized that people who were socially isolated took care of themselves not as well, and also that there is some kind of benefit for the nervous and cardiovascular system when we have positive connections with others. And that actually a lot of the diseases that people present with are the result of poor relationships with others, right? We would therefore say, because this country has a whole social care movement, that that falls into social care. So, as part of trying to re empower individuals and get to the root of the problem rather than the symptom, there is something called social prescription. And through social prescription, you can be prescribed into program of your interest where you're with other like-minded people. And by engaging in this kind of program, be it gardening or yoga, health outcomes are improved. Now, uniquely, when you do yoga, it's not just the fact that you're connecting with other beings and you feel good about those relationships, but actually the benefit of slow, controlled breathing and moving and doing that at home as well, which has an effect on your cardiovascular and nervous system. And recently, Paul Fox is the CEO. He has championed creating a program also for health providers to help them with their stress. And we recently had a course accredited by the Royal College of GPs that GPs can take to better understand the value of yoga for patients. So that's really exciting. That hasn't happened before. And it's our attempt to really, through all different vehicles that we can and all different avenues, to have yoga included in the healthcare system. Because what happens is people learn skills that they can take away to improve their own well being. They feel more empowered. And it also takes the pressure off of the healthcare system.
That's lovely. I really wish that this grows and touches more and more people, more and more health taker. I myself started yoga during my medical studies and found like, wow, that's a tool that I can add to first myself. I did it for myself first. And then also that helps me to relate to my patients, to the families of my patients, and then even helps them to carry them further whenever, I mean, for all the things that is not so technical or, chemical or even surgical. So I was very, very happy to find yoga early in my medical studies. And I'm so happy that there are more actions taken, like official and association alliances, formed so that this can happen. I have really discovered, I'm still discovering, like you said, research is happening every day with new findings on how yoga helps. So I want just to go back to a few things that you have said here and there. You said so there is a 3-year training to become a yoga therapist, but you also said that there are some people who said that these asanas will help for this or for that. Can we have a little bit of your opinion on this? When you look at benefits of asanas, so they'll tell you at the physical level, at the mental level, at the emotional level, this particular asana will work for this and that. What is your take on this? Do we have like asanas, I'm talking about really asanas right now, that make you more happy, those that make you more going inwards? Is it a myth or is it really there?
Wouldn't want to say anything is a myth. And, if we're talking about having scientific evidence to provide it, we would need better tools. To the best of what we currently understand, it's not accurate. You don't do downward dog, and this has more of an effect on your mood or an anxiety than, if you do, I don't know, than if you do a seated forward bend. I'm using the English names. We could also use, the Sanskrit names. It doesn't seem to be the case. However, we can think about what happens when we stretch the body and how that impacts the brain, right? When we hold a stretch and the body feels safe, that indicates to the brain, and I could go through all the mechanisms, but that would take us another 10 minutes. But that indicates to the brain that we're feeling relaxed and safe. In return, the brain evokes this more parasympathetic state, which then leaves the body feeling more easy and also probably leads to greater flexibility, but that is dependent person by person. Additionally, when we do a flowing kind of sequence, we're having to engage in the action of mindful planning of where we're moving. And that seems to create a lot of crosstalk between motor and cognitive circuits of the brain. And when those two are more linked up and we gain greater control over the motor circuits, we also start to gain greater control over the cognitive circuits. But in terms of like, if I take Cobra, for example, am I going to elevate my mood? There's really not evidence for those kinds of things. There was one study in 2004 conducted by somebody named Shapiro, and it wasn't the most rigorous of studies. And he found that back bends elevated mood slightly more than other poses. But this was one study, it was not repeated. But what is interesting, it's the pranayama. The pranayama is what actually has the greatest effect, first of all, for mental health, and what we're possibly able to have more defined understanding of their different impacts. Although we're just starting to tease that out as well. Yeah, in fact, just for the audience to know, so one of the most well-respected reviewers of yoga research, that means he looks at different studies and tries to make sense of whether or not, based on the different levels of rigor and the different kinds of protocols, if there's actually a good evidence base for a specific condition. So one of the best known reviewers, he does this, is named Holger Kramer. In a study that he did in 2018 on major depressive disorder, I think that was the year, he basically said that that the greatest benefit of yoga is the pranayama for depression. And that will be echoed throughout the research. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, so that's exactly what I wanted to ask. So where do we start? Can we start? Like, would you say to people who are watching us right now that they could start with a pranayama, with something simple? Do I have to do a lot of asanas and exercise to become flexible, to be what we see in Instagram? Or is it more accessible for me, for anybody?
No, I mean, you don't need to do those kinds of difficult pretzel-like poses. It's always useful to become more flexible and open the body within reason, not to the level that you hurt yourself, and to improve your physical health. But in terms of the greatest benefit, it's the breathing, and simply slow, controlled breathing, especially with an elongated exhalation, breathing in and out through the nose. This is powerful. And the ujjayi, or ocean breath, that really helps us to elongate the exhalation. And so it's a wonderful, simple method that anybody can do. And it has pretty profound impacts.
Can you tell us just a little bit more about that? Like how does just extending the exhalation, how is it that going to help me, and especially at the mind level?
Sure. Okay, so remember that nerve, the vagus, that I talked about, and I said it released acetylcholine, and that acetylcholine inhibited some of those inflammatory markers. So this vagus, it comes out of the brainstem, particularly in an area called the medulla oblongata. Vagus comes from Latin to wander, so it's all over the viscera. I know you can't see my hands when they go below the screen, but I'm going all the way down to my diaphragm. Right. And one of the really important points from the vagus moving downwards into the body is from the brainstem to the heart. This is coming out of a place called the nucleus ambiguus. They called it that because they didn't know what it did, down to the pacemaker, or the sinoatrial node of the heart. Now, there's a relationship to our breathing and the vagus. When the vagus sends a message to the heart in general, that message is slow down your heartbeat. And it does that in a chemical way by releasing acetylcholine to the heart, which slows down the rate of beating. Now, we know, and this is a physiological principle that occurs across the board for human beings, that when you elongate the exhalation, the vagus actually enhances the amount of signals it sends, thereby in every exhalation, the heartbeat is slower than it is on the inhalation. So what happens as you elongate the exhalation over and over is you have these swaths, periods where the heart rate is slowed down. And in turn, information is not just sent from the brain down to the body, but from the body up to the brain. And when the heart rate is being slowed down in an intermittent way over and over again, this then indicates to the brain that we feel safe and calm. The brain will then evoke, theoretically, we believe, the release of more GABA, that inhibitory neurotransmitter, and we will have a downgrading of stress and anxiety. And it's been hypothesized, actually, also by Chris Streeter, that if you continuously increase levels of GABA, you won't just have a moment of reduced anxiety, but circuits in the brain will change in positive ways that will allow us to become more resilient to stress. So, this is something super, super simple, but actually with quite profound effects. And it's generally the first thing I teach people because you can do it anywhere. And the more often you do it, the more potent your vagus becomes, we believe, in helping to slow down the heart rate.
So we are very, very far from asanas and exercise. Here we really enter into the finest effect of yoga as a practice from movement, because you can also learn to do that through movement in an asana. But here you're telling me I can do it at home, I can do it in my car, I can do it in my kitchen or at the office, which is quite amazing and has such a powerful impact. Going back from the body, from the breath to the brain, and telling myself it's all okay. Yeah. So
it's all okay.
It's very beautiful. I want to go back to something you said last year, where you said very beautifully that you were not talking about cure when you were talking about yourself, especially, but you were looking at reestablishing a good relationship with yourself, and not tell people that, okay, do this for so many weeks and that you are cured about something, but establishing a kind of a routine, if I understand well. If you could rephrase that, it would be very helpful for people to understand.
I wish I remembered what I said, but
yeah, the idea of I find it a little bit difficult for people to think that they're going to do this exercise, for example, like you said, for a week and then everything will be fine. Okay, that's what I want to come.
So I think, I think what we need to consider for our mental well-being is that it is like lifetime hygiene. If we have proclivity towards being depressed, anxious, if we've had traumas, anything else, the brain kind of errs in that direction. Just like if we had high blood pressure, right? And if we're managing these issues ourselves, and in that I mean the mental health issues, or we're managing them in conjunction ourselves with something else, it's really important that we keep this up all the time because we already have the neural architecture in the brain to go down those anxious pathways, those depressive pathways, etc. And so day in and day out, we need to constantly be building the alternative. It's like maintenance. Now, there was a time in my life where I thought, I just thought, if I did this, I'd be better and I'd have to stop. But there's actually a benefit in the fact that we need to do it for our entire lives because it keeps us well. And having that maybe tendency to move into an anxiety if we don't do our practice or to move into low mood keeps us doing it. And the benefits for our long-term cognition, for keeping the brain well and healthy, for the body, for our social relationships is wonderful. So it's actually a good thing that it's not a quick fix. And it's important that people see this. Dr. Satya Khalsa, who's a friend of mine, he said, it should be like brushing your teeth. You wouldn't leave your house without doing your practice.
Okay, so I want to finish this interview with my last question. So bringing it into a daily routine, maybe going to schools, maybe teaching children how to include that, and of course teaching adults, teaching health practitioners. What are the areas where you're working on, like currently?
Oh, I don't work on bringing yoga to schools.
Yeah. So, but you don't work on this one, but you work on. I mean, you were just saying that you agree that it should become also part of our
Yeah.
team, and you're working on bringing it to health providers,
Hmm.
teaching themselves to become also yoga teachers and aware of uh, the benefits of yoga. So what would be maybe your big advice to all the people who are following us?
I would say, start and practice. And the more that you practice, other people will see the positive effects on you. And they will ask, how is it you're managing your life a little better? How is it that you're managing to do more things and still be at ease? How is it you kept your calm? And then you tell them, and you might offer them something very simple. It's always important, I think, that people come to you rather than you trying to be too missionary about it. My experience is people respond badly, so that we become the model. And then we teach them something very simple like slow, controlled breathing. And then they share that outward. And in fact, there was just a study published, I think last week, looking at healthcare providers' perceptions of yoga in the UK. And what we found is the greatest likelihood that somebody will prescribe or recommend yoga to a patient is that they did it themselves and had a positive experience.
So
So
we
we
need
feel it. Yeah, it'll be passed on.
to teach more doctors, obviously. Yes.
Yeah. Do you know, Veronique, I actually, when you were talking about starting in medical school, in 2011 to 2014, I taught medical students at the Boston University School of Medicine about the research behind yoga and mindfulness and the practice. And at the end, they all had to write a paper. And I would say 100% of the students said it shifted their perception of medicine by giving them an understanding of how important their own health and well-being was in practice, and also that there would be things other than allopathic medicine that could be added to what they offered patients. So
Thank
we should have yoga being
God.
taught in every medical school.
Yes, thank God. Yeah, in heartfulness also we go. I mean, I was myself. We first went to teach the meditation and practice that we do in heartfulness for doctors. With a few doctors, we went to doctors, and these doctors found it so interesting that they said, "Can you teach my patients? I've been looking for something like this." So,
Right?
but the idea was first to take care of our own people, and I'm very grateful that first you bring really this element that the doctors will be looking for. What are the things you're talking about? Where does it work? How can it work? How can it be so simple? And we do have facts, and this is why there's research, in yoga right now, so that there is something that the entire community can believe, and trust. And so that it becomes a prescription, that would be really wonderful. So I really wish you all the best. I hope you train more trainers to become able to teach more doctors, to teach more patients, even if it's not being in yoga therapy, but at least being aware of the
Mhm.
state and what they can do to support better, and not just to teach yoga as asana exercise only. So Heather, I want just you to end up with anything that you would like to pass on, a message that you feel that you have not been able to say so far to the public who is watching us.
Well, I feel like I've said a lot, but I just want everybody to remember, no matter what you think you need to have in the external world to be happy, that actually having an internal locus of control within inside yourself, where you feel well because of your ability to connect into who you are, is going to lead to a more joyous life than controlling the external conditions and having the objects of your desires, which will always ebb and flow. And yoga has always taught that. So don't be afraid to go inside and build your universe there.
Thank you. It's a beautiful way to end. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.